There is a bird at your feeder right now that has already made a decision about you. Not a vague general comfort with human presence. A specific, individual assessment of you. Your movements, your patterns, your predictability. Stored in a brain the size of a walnut and updated every single time you step outside. You probably think the birds at your feeder are simply tolerating you, that they stay because the food is there and you happen to be nearby. That is not what the science says. What the science says is that the bird at your feeder knows who you are. It has been watching you longer than you have been watching it. And at some point, without you noticing, it made a choice. Today, we are going into exactly how that choice works. The neuroscience of individual recognition in birds. The specific behaviors researchers have identified that tell you a bird has moved you from threat to trusted. The difference between a bird that tolerates your presence and a bird that has genuinely chosen you. And the one thing most people do that resets the entire process without ever knowing it happened. Stay until the end, because the last section changes the way you understand every interaction you have ever had at a feeder. The starting point is something most people never consider. From the moment you step into your yard, every bird that can see you is running an assessment. Not a simple fight or flight calculation, a detailed, continuously updated individual profile that includes your size, your movement patterns, the rhythm of your approach, the specific way you hold your body, and critically, your history with that individual bird. This is not anthropomorphism. This is documented neuroscience. Research published in the journal Animal Cognition by scientists at the University of Vienna demonstrated that birds maintain individual recognition of specific humans across time gaps of weeks and months. The same bird, the same human, recognized specifically, not as a generic large primate, but as a known individual with a known behavioral history. The mechanism behind this recognition is more sophisticated than most people realize. Birds have a region of the brain called the Nidopallium caudolaterale, which functions analogously to the prefrontal cortex in mammals. It handles executive function, decision-making, and the integration of social information. Research by Onur Günterkün at Ruhr University Bochum has shown that this region in corvids and some songbirds supports a level of individual social recognition that matches or exceeds what most people would attribute only to mammals with far larger brains. Your chickadee is not just seeing a human, it is seeing you. The trust assessment begins the moment you appear, and the first thing the bird is measuring is something called flight initiation distance. This is the distance at which a bird decides to flee from an approaching threat. Research by William Cooper at Indiana University, and later extended by Daniel Blumstein at UCLA, established that flight initiation distance is not a fixed species characteristic. It varies by individual bird based on its specific history with specific threats. A bird that has been approached slowly and predictably by the same human dozens of times over weeks will have a dramatically shorter flight initiation distance with that human than with a stranger. This means the bird at your feeder that stays when you walk to within 6 feet, when every other bird flushes, is not brave. It is informed. It has a data file on you. It knows from repeated experience that your particular approach pattern does not end in a threat. That specific knowledge, about you specifically, is what is keeping it on the feeder while the others leave. The research that changed how ornithologists think about this was conducted by John Marsluff at the University of Washington. Marsluff and his team spent years studying crow responses to individual humans in urban environments. What they found was that crows not only recognized individual human faces, but maintained that recognition across years, and transmitted threat assessments to other crows who had never encountered the individual themselves. A crow that was captured and banded by a researcher in a particular mask remembered that mask as threatening 2 years later. It taught that threat assessment to its flockmates. Crows that had never seen the masked researcher treated the mask as a confirmed threat based on social information alone. The implications for your yard go beyond crows. If a threat assessment can be socially transmitted, so can a trust assessment. The chickadees and nuthatches at your feeder are not forming their opinions of you in isolation. They are embedded in a social information network that includes every other bird in that yard, and likely several adjacent yards. When one bird at your feeder demonstrates comfort with your approach, the others are watching. They are updating their own assessments based on what they observe. You are not just building trust with one bird, you are building a reputation. The behavioral signs that a bird has moved you from threat to trusted are specific and measurable, and most people have seen them without knowing what they were seeing. The first sign is body orientation. A bird that perceives you as a threat will orient its body so that one eye is facing you at all times. Birds have monocular vision on each side, and binocular vision only in a narrow frontal field. Keeping one eye on a threat while the other scans for escape routes is a specific vigilance posture. When a bird turns to face you directly, both eyes forward, full binocular attention, it is not being confrontational. It is using its most precise vision to assess you at close range, which it only does when it has already downgraded the threat level significantly. The second sign is alarm call response. Research by Christopher Templeton at Reed College, building on earlier work by Peter Marler, documented the specific alarm call structure of black-capped chickadees in extraordinary detail. The chickadee alarm call encodes specific information about predator type and threat level in the number of D notes at the end of the call. A high-threat aerial predator produces a short, high-pitched C call with no D notes. A lower-threat terrestrial predator produces a chickadee call with multiple D notes. When a bird near you produces a low D count call rather than a high-threat C call, it is encoding you as a lower-level concern in the alarm network. Every bird within earshot is receiving that specific assessment. The third sign is what researchers call relaxed behavior in proximity. A bird that allows you to be present while it preens, while it stretches, while it engages in behaviors that require its full attention and make it temporarily more vulnerable, has placed you in a category separate from threat. Preening in your presence is not random. It is a behavioral signal that your proximity no longer demands continuous defensive vigilance. The fourth sign is the most specific, and the one that most reliably indicates genuine individual trust rather than simple habituation. It is approach. Not the bird approaching the feeder while you stand nearby, the bird approaching you, flying to a branch closer to where you are standing than where the feeder is, landing on the ground near your feet while you sit quietly. In some cases, landing on you. This is not the bird confusing you for furniture. Research on contact behavior in wild songbirds, including work by Tore Slagsvold at the University of Oslo, confirms that voluntary approach by a wild bird to a specific human represents the endpoint of an active trust-building process, not an accident of habituation. The question most people ask at this point is, what actually builds the trust? And the answer has more to do with what you do not do than what you do. The single most important variable in flight initiation distance research is predictability. Not gentleness, not quietness, predictability. A bird can habituate to loud, fast-moving humans if those humans are consistent. What it cannot habituate to is unpredictable variation in behavior. The sudden movement, the unexpected change in approach angle, the day you come out of a different door. Each unpredicted event resets a portion of the trust assessment and increases the flight initiation distance for that interaction. This is why the person who refills the feeder at the same time every morning from the same door in the same clothes with the same movement pattern builds trust faster than someone who interacts with birds more frequently but inconsistently. The bird is not evaluating your intentions. It is evaluating your predictability. Predictability is the only currency it can actually use. Research by Claudia Metke-Hoffman at Liverpool Hope University examined individual recognition and familiarity effects across multiple bird species and found that the speed at which individual trust develops is species-specific, but the mechanism is universal. Every species tested showed faster trust development with familiar individuals than with strangers, regardless of the behavior of the stranger. Familiarity itself carries weight. The bird at your feeder has a preference for you, not because you are particularly gentle or quiet, but because you are known. The thing most people do that resets the process without realizing it is this: they stare. Direct eye contact in nearly all bird species is a threat signal. A predator locks eyes on prey before it strikes. A dominant bird holds eye contact to assert hierarchy. When you look directly at a bird at your feeder, you are sending the same visual signal as a predator acquiring a target. The bird registers it. Its flight initiation distance increases. The trust assessment shifts slightly back toward threat. Research by Carolyn Smith at Macquarie University on gaze aversion in birds confirmed that birds respond to direct human eye contact with measurably elevated stress responses, even in individuals that are otherwise habituated to human presence. The bird that lets you stand 3 feet away will flush if you make sustained direct eye contact from the same distance. Not because you moved, because of where you looked. The fix is counterintuitive. Look slightly past the bird. Use peripheral vision. Move your gaze slowly and avoid locking directly on the bird's eye. This is not what feels natural when you want to watch a bird closely. It is what the bird reads as non-threatening. There is one more dimension to this that the research has only recently begun to document, and it is the one that most directly explains why some people seem to have yards where birds come unusually close, and others never get within 20 feet of the same species. Birds assess not just your behavior, but your affect. The research on this is early and contested, but work by Claudia Washer at Anglia Ruskin University on social stress responses in corvids suggests that birds can read physiological stress signals in humans, elevated heart rate, tension in movement, changes in breathing pattern, and respond to them with elevated vigilance, even in the absence of threatening behavior. A person who approaches a feeder in a relaxed, unhurried state produces a different response than a person who approaches with physical tension, even if the movement pattern is identical. The bird at your feeder may be reading something you are not consciously projecting, and it is updating its assessment of you based on that signal every single time you appear. The chickadee that lands on your hand does not do so because it is tame. It is not tame. It is a wild animal, running a wild animal's threat assessment on every interaction it has ever had with you. The landing means you passed. Consistently, over time, with a predictability and a physical presentation that the bird's nervous system registered as safe enough to close the last distance. That landing is the endpoint of a process that started the first time the bird saw you walk out of your back door. It has been watching since then, building a file, updating an assessment, making a decision about you specifically based on evidence you provided without knowing you were being evaluated. Have you ever had a bird approach you closer than you expected? Or noticed one bird at your feeder that stays when all the others leave? Tell me about it in the comments. Those moments are exactly what this science is describing. I read every single one. Subscribe for new videos every week on the birds in your yard, what they are really doing, and the science behind every interaction you have ever had at your feeder. There is a practical dimension to all of this that most bird feeding guides never mention, and it connects directly to the layout of your yard in ways you can change starting today. Flight initiation distance research consistently shows that birds tolerate closer human approach when cover is nearby. A bird feeding at a feeder placed 2 feet from a dense shrub has a shorter flight initiation distance than the same bird feeding at a feeder placed in the open center of a yard. The reason is not comfort in the aesthetic sense. It is escape route calculation. A bird that knows it can reach cover in under a second has already solved the escape problem before the threat materializes. That solved problem reduces the distance at which it needs to react. This means the physical layout of your yard, where you place the feeder relative to cover, how much dense shrub is within 2 wing beats of the feeding station, directly affects how close a bird will allow you to get. The trust you build through behavioral predictability operates within a framework set by the physical environment. A yard with good cover structure and a behaviorally consistent human can produce flight initiation distances that researchers who study this in the field describe as remarkably short. The bird that lands on your hand in a well-structured yard with a patient, predictable person is not a miracle. It is the predictable endpoint of a system running exactly as the biology designed it to run. You provided the environment. You provided the behavioral consistency. The bird provided the assessment. The landing is just the moment the math resolved. Every bird at your feeder right now is running this calculation. The ones that flush when you appear have a current assessment that puts you on the wrong side of the threshold. The ones that stay have already moved you across it. And the one that watches you from the closest branch, that turns to face you with both eyes, that does not leave when the others do, that one made a specific decision about you, based on evidence, based on history, based on something you did, consistently, over time, without knowing you were being evaluated. It chose you. The science is just the explanation of how.